lucky to have been raised in a storied family. But my journey to professional storytelling came through a stage door. My maternal grandparents were performers in vaudeville. So when I was young, I thought it was kind of neat, but a little creepy, when I learned I had sawdust growing through my veins. But I followed in my grandparents' love of theater, and I majored in it in college, and then I headed to the Big Apple to make my mark, and ended up eventually in Massachusetts, where I met and married my husband, Grant, while performing and directing theater in the North Shore. Grant and I have been married for quite some time, and our boys are grown. But you know, it seems like only yesterday when I held our firstborn, and I just stared in those blue-gray eyes, cloudy, and I thought, who are you, my little man? What adventures does life hold for you, It was a Saturday in late September 1982 when Grant and I and our 17-month-old son, David, were invited to spend the day in the great woods of South Carver, Massachusetts. There is a Renaissance festival known as the King Richard's Fair. We'd been invited by some of our theater friends who had been hired to perform there. King Richard's Fair is an authentic medieval fair, complete with sword fights and jousting tournaments, men in tights riding big steeds, saucy serving wenches, gypsy peasant dancers, huge turkey legs on sticks. King Richard himself and his Majesty's grand court, sights, sounds, and smells of a return to the past. Well, this particular Saturday, our theater friends had been invited to perform a unique and bawdy comedy troupe which they called themselves the Merry Bottoms. And they had appropriate names as well. Let's see. Big strapping Dan Dowling, he portrayed Leon Topabottom. Short, scrawny Donnie Belagran became Ivan Itchybottom. And voluptuous Cheryl Salatino became Ann Whattabottom. Well, this particular Saturday, they were enacting The Miller's Tale from Chaucer. And David, our toddler, he sat at the edge of the stage, giggling and watching all the action, even though I think a lot of the adult humor went right over his head, I hope. But David loved the excitement and the fun and the running around, and he especially loved watching his Auntie Cheryl perform. Well, after the story was over and the audience left, Cheryl agreed to go through the fairgrounds with us as soon as she got out of that costume, and especially removing those rolled up sweat socks under her bra. Well, I said to her, hey, Cheryl, is there someplace I can change the baby around here? Because please don't make me go to those disgusting toilets out there in that hot field. Well, luckily, Cheryl had the master schedule. She said, let me check here. Oh, yeah, good. The cottage stage. Okay, it's right over there through that grove of trees. It's on the other side. I'll get changed, and I'll meet you there. Great. So Grant and I took turns pushing David in the little umbrella stroller as we struggled to maneuver every single tree root sticking up from the authentic dirt road. Now, when we got there to the cottage stage, Grant headed to the food court for cold libations. I headed to the very last bench in the theater seating, way in the back. Good, no one was here. So I opened up the diaper bag and I took out the yellow changing mat, the rubber mat, and I laid it on the little bench. And then I lifted David up from the stroller and I stood him squarely on top of the bench. Then I proceeded to unhook the two hooks of his green Oshkosh Bagosh overalls, and I pulled them down to his ankles, and then I carefully, one at a time, removed each pant leg. Well, believe me, I had no other choice to do it this way, because David was rather tall for his age, and he no longer could fit into the overalls with the convenient snaps in the crotch. So I got off the overalls, and then I gently laid him down and took out a package of wipes, and I sat at the end of his feet, ready to begin my favorite job. But Cheryl arrived. Hey, kiddo, we're almost done here. Just have a seat. She sat down next to her. Oh, and then Grant arrived. There he was. He had the cold drinks. Gather round, ye lords and ladies. What the heck? We all swung around, and there, standing behind us, was an attractive young gal dressed as a jester, complete with a purple and gold dangling jingle bell hat. She had a tall staff with a mini-me jester headstock on top, and she also carried a blue velvet sack. Where the heck did she come from? The stage is way up there. Gather round, ye lords and ladies of King Richard's fair, and hear the tale of when St. George slayed the mighty dragon. I think she was Irish. Well, from out of nowhere came this large crowd. They must have been following her. So she began to go in through the seating in the audience, inviting everyone to come and sit down on the benches, as she began to choose different people from the audience to portray the various characters in her upcoming story. And, well, she spotted a little boy, blonde-haired, cute boy. He's about 8. And she went over. He was going to play St. George. And in her sack, she pulled out a white cloak, and she draped it around his little shoulders. And then she pulled out a long carrot stick to use as his sword. And up to the stage he went. Then she coaxed a robust, jovial man with a full beard to play King Richard, draping a purple cape around his stout shoulders and topping his shiny bald head with a crown. And up he went. Then she spotted Grant sitting next to Cheryl. She reached in and she pulled out a green feathered cap, and she said, "You, sir, you look like the coin doctor who would heal everyone." And she pulled out a bag of apples with his magic bag of tricks, and up Grant went to play his part too. Cheryl and I smiled. We knew that this story was going to be a lot of fun to watch. Then the jester started going through the audience, searching for the perfect actor to portray the dragon. She saw a little red-haired, freckle-faced boy. He was about 5, diagonally in front. And in her bag, she pulled out a smaller version of her purple and gold jingle bell hat. And she went over and she put it on his head and said, "You, sir, you'll make a fine dragon indeed. Give us a roar, a mighty roar." But silence was all he said. So she coaxed him some more. "Come on, mighty dragon, give us a roar, a mighty roar." But silence and the returned hat were his only response. The sound was coming from behind me. I swung around, and there was David sitting up on the yellow mat with his little hands posed as claws. A few people started to laugh, and Cheryl and I too, because we weren't at all surprised by his cute theatrics. Well, after all, he was practically raised in the wings. Well, the jester turned and she said, "Now, aren't you a wee bit small to be playing a mighty dragon, sir?" But this time, a few of the audience applauded, and some even cheered, and so the jester plopped the colorful jester hat on top of David's head, boom, and covered most of his face. But David needed no coaxing. He stood up, he took the outstretched hand of the storyteller, and he headed up with her to the stage to play his part. And that's when I realized, he's not wearing any pants. I didn't have time to change him. Excuse me, miss. No, he can't do this. I need to change him. Could you please pick somebody else? But David was already in character and turned to me with a So up David went to play his part. Now, the story of St. George began to unfold with the jester serving as narrator. But every time she introduced a new actor, new character to come down. Little David, who was to stand way upstage, he would toddle down to the end of the stage and he would give his line. She would say, "Not yet, mighty dragon. Go back up to your lair up there till it's your turn." David would smile. The audience always clapped for him, and he beamed, and I shook my head. There he was, maybe 2.5 feet tall. He had on a purple and green striped polo shirt. He had a little cloth diaper covered with white rubber bands, exposing rather chubby toddler thighs and legs. He had a pair of green socks rolled all the way down to his ankles, and he had on a pair of denim sneakers sporting bright orange shoelaces, and of course, the purple and gold dangling jingle bell hat all the way down, with only his mouth to be seen. I just smiled. He turned just as he was directed, and he headed back upstage to wait. And I almost died. See what I think I see? Yeah. I don't think that's a shadow. I just stared at the left rubber pants leg, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. Cheryl, think anyone else will notice? Well, maybe the audience was engrossed in the plot. Well, now the jester was beckoning for the dragon to come down, to come and play his part. So down David came, roaring and hissing all the way. Ha, roar, ha, ha. The audience started to snicker and then laugh and then point. The jester saw it too, peeking out of the rubber pants. And so in her loudest voice she said, "Now when St. George saw the mighty dragon, he knew at once it was indeed a stinking dragon." The audience lost it. David beamed. Ay, 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 ay. The jester was on a roll. "St. George knew at once what must be done. This stinking dragon was the stenchiest of stenchiest and foulest of fouls in all the land. At once St. George drew his mighty sword." Get up your carrot. Yes, sir. "And with all of his might," get down, you dragon, to lie down on the stage. "With all of his might, he struck the dragon in the gut." Stick it in his back. Yes. In the gut. Yes, you, ready, go. The dragon, the stinking dragon, was mortally wounded, and with a pitiful cry, give us a roar. Roar. Well done. He fell all the way down to the bottom of the ground with a huge thump. And down David went just as he was directed. He landed on his right side, his left thigh facing the crowd. It had been a hot day. Rubber holds heat. The diaper couldn't contain itself anymore. The jester took a deep breath and she said, "And that, my friends, is the true story. The true story of when St. George slayed the stinking dragon. And there lie the stinking dragon, his very life and essence oozing out of his body. Oozing out of his putrid body for all the world to see. Hurrah! Well done." The audience jumped up with applause. I grabbed the package of wipes. I ran up and worked my way through the audience to rescue my little stinking dragon, who had just made his acting debut to a standing ovation.